your personal story is also really fascinating, right? I personally found it really fascinating and hilarious at the same time. And a couple of incidents I just want to pick and would love to hear your version of it. Um, One of them is, your not so, it's quite recent trouble with the U.S. Border Patrol, who decided for no reason to stop you, and that led to this whole incident, which ended up you sending modified DNA to the U.S. government, which contained DNA from a platypus. So, and folks, this is not a sci-fi story. These are true events. So, Peter Watts, take it away.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
okay, you're actually covering about 2 years worth of events here.
It's a short story.
It is a yeah, I
See?
suppose. Um, I was helping somebody move to Nebraska in December of what was it, 2008, late 2008, maybe late 2009. Yes, 2009, I believe it was.
And that was it. He would just
That was
helping
all I
someone
was
move.
doing. I mean,
Yeah.
they said it was a random search, but then they said it was a random search because I was driving a rented black SUV, which is what drug dealers frequently um, drive. So it makes me kind of wonder what Officer Beaudre, where he learned his definition of the term random. But
So you were driving to the border.
we're getting
and you
ahead of
got
ourselves,
stopped.
right?
Yeah.
Down to Nebraska.
Yeah.
We had been told to avoid the Port Huron border crossing because those guys were assholes. So we went through Detroit. They were assholes too, but they let us through. We dumped the stuff off. There was the first major snowstorm of the year. It was coming up on our tails, so we wanted to get home
Right.
as fast as we could. And at this point, the shortest route was through the Port Huron border crossing. No problem, we thought. The assholes were on the U.S. side. And you never get stopped by the guys in the country you're leaving. You
It's true.
get stopped by the guys in the country that you're entering.
Yeah. People should be happy to let you go, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So 2 kilometers from the U.S. border, or from the Canadian border, Canadian-U.S. border, somebody waves at me. And I wave back and keep going because what the hell? And the guy I'm riding with is, I think they wanted you to pull over. I said, okay. So I pulled over.
I think you're used to Canadian cops.
I've had some
been part of
experience
the
with
problem.
Canadian cops too. We can get into that as well. I'm actually on record in the U.S. as being a cop tickler in Canada,
Oh, wow.
actually from Guelph.
Okay.
Um,
So you pulled over
so
eventually?
I pulled
or?
over. Oh, not even eventually. It was just like, we were talking a 5-second delay.
All right.
And this woman comes storming up to me and says, when I wave at you, I'm not just saying hello. I want you to pull over. And I said, well, I suppose it could be a cultural difference because, where I come from, waving actually does mean hello. And she did not appear to, that did not appear to ease her mood at all, which is kind of sad. I thought I was being kind of charming. She asked the regular questions. She demanded where I was going, where I was coming from, wanted to see the pink slip from the car, all this stuff. And all of a sudden, I noticed that there are these other border guards who've popped the back trunk and are going through our stuff.
Without asking.
Without asking, without telling. They're just doing it. And I happen to know that this actually violates their own protocols. So I turned to mention this to the person beside, to the officer, but she has gone to the back of the truck and is talking to somebody else. So I get out of my vehicle. And that's basically the point at which everything went to shit. Depending on who you read on the internet, depending on the various reports and so on that were filed, I was high on angel dust, and I picked up a female guard and threw her across the hood of the car. One person testified, Officer Beaudry testified, that he had come across several lanes of traffic to get involved because it was obvious that I was resisting arrest. not realizing that an hour before, the person he was actually coming to help had testified that she'd never gotten around to trying to arrest me.
Wow. So what happened?
Basically, what it comes down to is that not getting on the ground fast enough after being punched in the face by a border guard is a felony under Michigan statutes. And it's the same statute that encompasses everything from, quote, failing to follow a lawful command, all the way up to attacking somebody with a chainsaw.
Wow.
The statute spends 3 paragraphs defining what a person is. It does not spend a word defining what the phrase lawful command means. So if Officer Beaudry says, strip naked, get down on your hands and knees, and bark like a dog, is that a lawful command? Because Officer Beaudry has had 12 weeks of training in a Virginia summer camp? I wasn't sure, which is probably how I ended up getting maced. And at this point, I was told that, you know, I think that's where the angel dust story got started, because...
So that was false.
What? Oh, no, of course. I was driving.
Yeah.
I would have certainly have let myself level off before I got behind the wheel. But I guess the impression was that after, like they were telling me to get back in the vehicle. Eventually, I got back in the vehicle, but by this time, somebody was in the vehicle with me and was kind of grabbing my lapels and punching me. My reaction was, what is the fucking problem? Although I didn't even say fucking. I just said, what is the problem? Because I was being really polite to this guy who was between me and the steering wheel, punching me in the face. Then they wanted me to get out of the vehicle again. And then they maced me. And then I started, at this point I was handcuffed, and the thing is I could see that they were about to spray me. So I closed my eyes. Seems like a reasonable precaution.
Right.
The fact that I didn't immediately curl into a ball and start screaming like a baby apparently was considered evidence that I was high on something, because obviously I just blew off the pepper spray.
Wow.
But in fact, what I did was I kind of wiped my eyes and at that point I was hyper-producing mucus because, you know, you have this weird capsaicin stuff going through your... but nobody would blow my nose for me. I kept asking if somebody would blow my nose, and they refused to. So I started just blowing my own nose by just exhaling hard through my nose to try and avoid suffocating, at which point I was told that if any of my snot hit any of the officers, I would be charged with assault.
Wow.
I ended up... Again, this was all of a sudden, now we were in the teeth of this major winter storm that we were trying to avoid. There's the jail they stuck me in had this sort of this heated central place where they would let you go into every now and then to get these little TV trays with 4 different types of the same kind of beans and purple Kool-Aid. But then you'd have to go back into these side areas, which were just cinder blocks, and as far as I could tell, completely unheated. And it was weird because I spent the night burning up because the entire part of my body was still saturated with this pepper spray.
Ouch.
So I was feeling like I was constantly burning, but of course that's not there's no thermogenesis there, right? So I'm actually shivering. I'm actually going hypothermic while at the same time feel like I'm burning up. It was a really interesting...
Wow.
It was a really interesting experience.
So I believe that's when the community and folks lined up, because obviously they had no idea you're now an author, you have a following, and obviously eventually that led to you being deported to
I
Canada?
don't have that much of a following, but a lot of the people that I know do.
Yeah.
You may have heard of a guy called Cory Doctorow. You may have heard of a guy called Neil Gaiman.
Mm-hmm.
These people just started tweeting it. And I was like, I didn't know that this was going on, right? I'm stuck in this jail.
Right.
As far as I know, nobody even knows that I'm here.
Yeah.
But, Cory puts it on Boing Boing, and half the internet wakes up.
Nice.
Before I know it, I've got over 60 grand for my legal defense fund.
Nice.
I didn't
Love it.
do any of this, right? I was still in jail. I had kind of a bail hearing. I had to pay $500. They were going to let me out. But then all of a sudden they weren't. All of a sudden I was going back to general population. And I didn't know why that was. I ended up in general population. I was the only white guy in the entire pod. It was strange.
Wow.
They didn't allow us pillows because apparently you stuff pillows down the toilet. So what you had to use are these old paperback books, one of which was Mr. God, This is Anna, which was some kind of book of Christian apologetics, and another was an advanced review copy of a Tor is my own publisher, a Tor paperback called The Loch, a science fiction book about the Loch Ness Monster. That's what I slept on that night. At any rate, finally they were going to let me out, but the guy who was running the pod says, you know, you can leave if you want to, but they're just going to arrest you as soon as you leave and charge you with something else.
That's crazy. Wow.
And I thought, well, I might as well go through with this. And in fact, they were about to do that. I could see them waiting on the other side of the door as I was heading out. But
Wait, why would they do that?
Because why not? They have a captive audience, right?
Wow.
They could have just charged me with something else. I don't know what they had charged me with at that point. Like I say, this statute includes everything.
Wow.
But at that point, they were starting to get calls from the media. And so at that point, they let me go. But they didn't give me my coat. They didn't let me go back to the car. They said that the lot was closed, which is not true. The lot was open 24 hours a day. They basically drove me across the bridge and dumped me in shirt sleeves on the other side in the middle of this winter snowstorm. And
it's funny, you know, what the state can get away with. I mean,
oh yeah, I mean it's interesting the rationale too. You know, these people put their lives on the line. They're fighting terrorism. It's bullshit. Cops don't even make the top 10 in terms of dangers. Like real cops who actually have to pursue bad guys don't even make the top 10 in terms of homicide rates. The profession that gets killed most often are taxi cab drivers. But nobody seems to give them. Certainly, like border guards. They basically get paid to sit there hassling truck drivers, right? They don't have they don't. And as a matter of fact, the one of the people who arrested me was himself arrested for possession. Which was something I got to put into my letter of, quote, remorse, unquote.
Okay. Wow.
Anyhow, the trial was kind of a fiasco. We utterly demolished everything that the prosecution said.
And then I believe you got...
But I got convicted.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Because at the very end, when the prosecution had the final word, and she was actually quite brilliant about it, it was, she said, look, if you don't think he did any of these things, that's fine. If you want this put down in a bubble, when we told him to get on, when Officer Boji told him to get on the ground, before he got on the ground, he said, what's the problem? And that's failure to comply right there. You have to convict him on that basis. They didn't have video footage because this was not an actual border stop, right? This was on the other side of
this was 2 kilometers away.
Yeah, this was between the two border things. What they had was an automatic camera that took a snapshot every 2 seconds.
Wow.
And they tried to play that back. They did play that back. They slowed it down so that it looked like I stood there refusing to obey for 30 seconds. When we called them on that, because the timestamp, they were stupid enough to have a timestamp.
Oh God!
On the bottom of the thing, and it was taking 5 seconds for the timestamp to increment 1 second.
That's crazy.
And when
so the judge probably wasn't happy.
When we pointed that out, they said, "Oh, sorry, there's a computer glitch."
Oh, of course.
Anyhow, I was convicted. I was found guilty. Several jury members actually went online saying, we think this is bullshit. We have to convict because that's the way the law is written.
Right.
But the border guard's behavior was indefensible. one of the jurors actually wrote a letter on my behalf to the judge.
Wow.
And stood with me at my sentencing.
Wow.
Which resulted in her spending an entire year being harassed by the local police force for reasons which I'm sure have
What?
absolutely nothing to do with it. Yeah, no, like she was...
You're kidding me.
At
Wow.
one point, she was arrested because she was suspected of robbing one of those paycheck cashing short-term loan places, even though camera footage of the incident showed a middle-aged man in a beard. But because her husband was a Native
Wow.
American
Wow.
who was a trapper, the argument was she could have fashioned a fake beard out of animal skins. This was the kind of shit she was putting up with.
That's
She would come home from
What?
she got fired from her job as a security guard for no cause given. She came home and found that her place had been basically trashed. Her family was nowhere to be found. They had all
sounds
been
like
frog marched. They'd all been
yeah.
frog marched down to the local precinct on some other trumped up charge. None of them were ever charged
Wow.
with anything. I ended up, fortunately, I had a few $1,000s left in my legal defense fund. I ended up paying her mortgage for a month
Wow.
because it was a choice between having a roof over their heads or paying their lawyer. So I actually feel like I made a pretty good lifelong friend at that point.
No,
She had to put up with a lot of shit. Anyhow, the judge kept me hanging for the longest damn time. We had this long, rambling discourse about how ever since 9/11 we must respect our authority figures and blah blah blah, and he didn't. I was a weird person, and he didn't know if I was just a free spirit or what. But finally he decided that I was the kind of person he'd like to have a beer with. And that justice, as far as he was concerned, was what he said it was in his courtroom. So he basically let me off.
wow.
I had to pay like a $1,500 fine to cover various miscellaneous court.
And I remember you had to write some kind of a letter.
No, that's a
after,
sequel,
right?
and we may not even have time to
Okay.
cover that.
Fair enough.
That was 6 years later.
All right. Cool.
But in this case, it was. I actually got a couple of new readers out of it. I was in the elevator going down to the basement to pay my fine, and there was this big, tough-looking, bald dude there, sort of sitting there with tattoos on his arms. And he kind of looked down at me, and he sized me up, and he says, "I don't know if you staged this whole thing just to get more people to read your stuff, but I went on Land the other night, and I read something by yours. I think it was called The Things.
Yeah.
And
See.
he said, it was really good."
Yeah. Nice.
And he
nice.
had actually not seen John Carpenter's original movie, so he didn't actually know.
Oh, he did not. Okay.
He did not know
Interesting.
the original movie that story was riffing off of, but he thought it was pretty cool.
Cool.
So anyhow, I went home, but at this point, at that point, I was, because I'm now a felon in Michigan, I was banned from returning to the U.S.
Okay.
I did, however, have to tender a DNA sample so that they can.
Yeah.
They also had to take my fingerprints because the first time they fingerprinted me in Michigan, they used a machine that was a proprietary machine that had been sold to them by somebody whose brother worked in the business, right? And that person had died of a fatal aneurysm. And so nobody knew how to calibrate the machine. So they kept taking my fingerprints, and the thing kept losing focus, and nobody knew how to fix it. So anyhow, in Canada, I had to get, where they know how to fingerprint people right. They basically said I can get fingerprinted in Canada, and I can produce this DNA swab in Canada. Well, back in 2007, I did a postdoc in molecular genetics. I really sucked at it. I'm terrible at molecular genetics. I didn't get a single decent sequence in the entire 2 years. But what I did do is I made some friends at the molecular genetics lab at the Royal Ontario Museum.
Nice.
So before I went in to produce my DNA sample, I got one of these friends to mix up a slurry of DNA from a half a dozen different species, like whatever she happened to have lying around in the freezer, right? I think there was some ibex in there, and there was some cactus, and there was, I don't know, there was just a weird bunch of shit.
That is so awesome.
And before I showed up, I just sluiced my mouth out with this. I have no idea if they ever processed or sequenced the DNA sample. I have no idea if it turned out. I mean, I have way more cheek cells and way more saliva than there was in this tiny little vial.
Wow.
But on the other hand, polymerase chain reaction, the whole point of that is that it takes small samples, small snippets of DNA and magnifies
Yeah.
them. It's basically a genetic photocopier. So I really have no idea whether that played out or not, or how it played out.
That's amazing.
But I like to think that somewhere somebody thinks that there's this weird hybrid of 8 different species wandering around free in Canada who should be in the Smithsonian or something.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.